What's going on, guys? I'm Zach.
I'm Levi.
Welcome to Blitz and Gigs, episode number 5.
All right, let's get straight into it. So, NFC Championship, AFC Championship. I think we want to start with the AFC. It's a little more exciting. Bills Chiefs.
Yeah. Another classic game between the two best quarterbacks in football. Another version of Josh Allen coming up just short. You saw that coming, though. So I know you want to take your little victory lap here about the Chiefs making it to their millionth straight Super Bowl appearance. So
Hate to say I told you so, but I really do feel like, it didn't end with the receivers. It starts with the receivers and the talent. I mean, this was not the year that the Bills should have gone to the Super Bowl. I don't see why the expectation changed just because of an exceptional record. They did get that regular season win against the Chiefs, but I don't, think regular season wins take that much stock when we're talking about, how championship ready a team is. Same thing with the Vikings. This was a rebuild year. It still is a rebuild year. They have time to figure it all out, and I don't think they should feel pressured to get there right now. I do think it raises some concerns about the future of the franchise. And yeah, Josh Allen's the guy for sure. They're getting ready to extend him again, and he has like 3 years left on his deal. But is Sean McDermott the kind of coach that could get you there in the future?
yeah, you make a great point there. So Sean McDermott has been a very A-level coach, B-plus level coach for Buffalo. A lot of winning seasons under him, and they make it far enough in the playoffs to where he's never going to be a guy on the hot seat. But if we're being honest here, like if I was to tell you, take a superstar athlete, young in their prime, makes the playoffs consistently, but can't do it with the current guy, it sounds like the beginning of Steph Curry's career, right? Like they needed to get rid of Mark Jackson in order to bring in Steve Kerr, and then he took him to the next level. Not saying that Sean McDermott and Josh Allen aren't able to win a Super Bowl together, but it's starting to look like maybe bringing in an offensive guy and changing the tone of how they face this Chiefs team in the playoffs, and honestly just changing the mindset going into these playoffs every year needs to change, because how many times are we gonna lose on the last possession to the Chiefs in the playoffs before something's got to give? So not sitting here calling for Sean McDermott's job, because he's one of the best coaches in football for sure, but it's starting to get to a point where what's next from here, because Patrick's just going to keep running through the AFC and getting Super Bowl appearances until somebody steps up and takes it from him. And I thought it was going to be Lamar's year to do that. After he lost, I thought it was going to be Josh's, and it just nothing seeming to work. So what do you think about Sean McDermott and where the Bills' direction should be going forward?
I mean, I'd argue it's time for a culture shift in Buffalo. We're in year 6 or 7 of Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen's careers, and I feel like we saw a culture shift in Baltimore. Even though it's still a run-first game, like Lamar's passing game really opened up. They kind of have a receiver one in Zay Flowers, and Derrick Henry is unlike anything they've ever had in that backfield. Whereas in Buffalo, it's kind of the same old story. It's just regressed. Like they lost defensive talent. The run game is there, but it's not the priority. Mm-hmm. And that's where I'd say, maybe make Joe Brady the assistant head coach next year. Get him that experience so that, you're not out of options when Sean McDermott lets you down again in the playoffs. This defense is not enough to get them to a championship. I think it'd be incredibly helpful if they were in the big game, but until they get there, you really do have to consider all your options at coaching and say, yeah, okay, Joe Brady, you're the next head coach of the Buffalo Bills. You're going to run the ball 20 times a game, and Josh Allen is going to get maybe 5 design runs a game. Whatever it would take to move things forward, because you can't repeat the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. It's great results that you're getting, but it's not enough. It's not what you want.
Yeah, I think in today's NFL, it's so offensive heavy, and due to the rule changes, the play style, the importance of quarterback play nowadays, it's just, you can't get by with having a defensive head coach and making a Super Bowl. The last time we had one was Bill Belichick in 2018, 2019. It's just not the way to have success anymore. It's phased out. You know, guys like Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Andy Reid, these guys are in the Super Bowl every year, and they're offensive, whether they have a top tier quarterback or not. These guys are the ones that are continuously having success. So, you know, I mentioned Harbaugh in previous episodes, Tomlin in a previous episode, needing to see a culture shift, and I think we're on the same page here that it's an offensive league, and an offensive mind needs to come in and change the vibes there in Buffalo.
For sure, and this is where if you're Sean McDermott, you're not wanting to be the villain in Buffalo for the next 3 to 4 years. Try to get Joe Brady involved as much as you can, and I would push for him, to get the best results possible, so that maybe he gets hired out, maybe he doesn't stick around in Buffalo. The longer he sticks around in Buffalo, I think the worse condition Sean McDermott's job is in. So I would, if I'm in Sean McDermott's position, looking to let's bolster the run game and let's have more improvements at that O-line, not just for Josh's sake, because Josh is a play extender and an improviser, but for James Cook's sake. Let's go ahead and give him a deal now. He's in probably year 3, I think.
Yeah.
Let's give him a deal now. Running backs are playing into their 30s now with no sweat. I don't see a problem with trying to get on top of these games more, play more sound football. The explosiveness of that Bills offense and defense is not doing it anymore. The same way, the 2023 Cowboys or Dolphins, it's not enough when you get to the playoffs. There are a lot of teams that can just dismantle you in every single way. Mm-hmm. It's not about, who's having the best game of their life. Tua throwing for 6 touchdowns, Dak having 5 all-purpose touchdowns against, the 2022 Bucks. Yeah. It's not like that. It's like that most of the time for Josh Allen and the Bills, but not when they play the Chiefs in January.
Yeah, you make a great point, because playoff football is totally different. I mean, you see Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, namely, just look totally different in the regular season, because they're pushing all their chips to the table and they're giving every drive, every play, everything they have. And the Chiefs are just playing chess, because they're sitting here forcing guys like Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice, trying to get everybody involved, so that when it's time for a big spot in the playoffs, everybody's ready for it. The Bills tried, I believe, 5 tush pushes against the Chiefs this past weekend, and they were successful in, I think, one of them. And granted, they had one that should have been successful, but it wasn't called that way. So when you go, they were the most successful tush push team all year. It wasn't Philly. They converted at a higher rate. But when you only have one move to go to, you got to think that pro level defensive coordinators like Spags are going to be ready for it, and they were. So you got to have more cards to play, more gears to hit if you're Buffalo, and honestly if you're any team come playoff time, and they weren't prepared for it, which also speaks to how Andy Reid continues to outcoach Sean McDermott in these big games. And I mentioned it before, he's a great coach, but just continuously coming in second, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. I mean, I never thought we'd be saying that Josh Allen's Bills are a one-trick pony, but that's really what it's become. They don't run the ball. They don't stick to that game plan, and I think it's their undoing. Mm-hmm. You're not going to win the game on defense. You have to control time of possession, 100%. Especially against a team like the Chiefs. So I think that's mostly coaching. That's just the way I see it. That roster, as depleted as it is from last year, I think it's still good enough to beat these Chiefs, and they just didn't do it. I think it's in large part because of game plan. The same way that, the Ravens could have handled the clock way better 2 weeks ago. We discussed that.
Yeah, I mean, it really is kind of a carbon copy of the previous week, where both teams have success running the ball, but one of them just forgets to do it. I mean, James Cook finished the game with 13 carries. That's just not enough. In a cold weather game in the playoffs where you want to keep the ball out of Mahomes' hands, Kareem Hunt shouldn't be finishing with more carries than James Cook. He just flatly. So I want to fast forward to the final drive of that game. This is 2 years in a row now where Josh Allen's had the ball in crunch time with less than 3 or 4 minutes left, has a chance to go down the field, make it so that Mahomes never touches the ball again, go down, score, and win the game. Last year, It took them like 40 yards, and granted they missed the field goal, but come up with 0 points. This past weekend, 6 plays, 1 completed pass, game over. They had 1 first down, and they couldn't move the ball. I don't believe Josh Allen is not a clutch quarterback. I think he is the second best quarterback in the league to Mahomes. But when it comes down to it, he's not a clutch guy like Mahomes is. He's not taking his team all the way and converting those big downs. So what do you think about how Josh Allen how he's been coming up short against Kansas City specifically this last couple of years?
I mean, he's so easily put in those conversations with Mahomes and Allen and, the top guys in the league. But I think there really does need to be a distinction between Mahomes as the S tier and everybody else, all these, 6-year contract guys in the A tier. Mm-hmm. Outstanding quarterbacks, they will win you a Super Bowl. They won't be carried by their roster, but they're just not him. The same way, Drew Brees isn't Tom Brady. And Drew Brees is more accurate than Tom Brady numerically, but it's a different level. Right. The ability to just manage the clock the way he does. And a lot of that can be attributed to Andy Reid too. We see so many coaches who could be outstanding play callers. They can call a great defense or offense or whatever. And their biggest gripe is game management. John Harbaugh, Ravens fans calling for Harbaugh to be fired all year. If Harbaugh's fired, he's going to get a job the next second. Mm-hmm. Mike McCarthy, 3 straight 12-5 seasons, but consistently having game management issues. And even Kyle Shanahan at this point, who was, regarded as one of the best game managers in the league, in terms of just, holding on to his timeouts, not using challenges at random moments. And, Andy Reid kind of has done it twice to him now in the big game, which has resulted in the narrative shifting. Nobody's on that level, the way Andy Reid is and the way Mahomes is. And so I think we just got to be careful with the comparisons we make to Pat Mahomes because, nobody's on that level.
Yeah.
Like you said a week or so ago, you said Pat's the best until he doesn't win a Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. Until Jalen Hurts does. And even then, Jalen Hurts is not better than Pat. But, he enters that conversation.
Sure. As
long as Pat is the defending champion and the Chiefs are the defending champion, you can't argue against that being the gold standard.
100%. Switching sidelines here, looking at the Chiefs. I mean, it's just how many times are, myself included, how many times are we gonna bet against these guys? It's just every week comes down to the final drive, final play, and they get it. It's probably the most sure thing in sports right now that Mahomes is gonna, if he gets the ball last, he's gonna win the game. So, what do you have to say about the Chiefs and how they pulled this one out?
I mean, they executed well throughout most of the game. There was one drive where the Bills took the lead, and from then on, it was just Chiefs leading the whole game. And with that in mind, this is the Chiefs team that in the past was just a crazy passing offense, mm-hmm. and drafted Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and he kind of faded away a couple years later. Kareem Hunt had his first stint there. Now he's on his second. Pacheco, the narrative was that he was the best angry runner in football, running for 60 yards a game, maybe 80 all-purpose. And now it's they just manage the clock so well in spite of their poor rushing game, but they still have the rushing attempts to show mm-hmm. for it. And I think that's the difference, is that even last year with a depleted receiver room, they're still passing the ball, and they'll just do whatever they have to do to make it work. Pat will do whatever he has to do to make it work. They have one of the worst O-lines in football, or worst left tackles at least, and you don't see it consistently being an issue for them since that Tampa Super Bowl. I think this is where they just have enough pieces to make the other pieces not look depleted. Mm-hmm. And I think that just goes to show the importance that the importance of the culture that Andy Reid and Pat Mahomes have built.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that with the Pats dynasty. Maybe they didn't have the craziest weapons in the world, but Brady still looked like a top 3 to 5 quarterback, at least statistically, every year. It didn't matter. Maybe they didn't have the personnel, in the secondary or up front, but Belichick always made them look like a top 5 defense. That just speaks to coaching. I mean, Andy Reid really, and Spags too. I want to give him credit on the defensive side of the ball because this has been a top 3 defense in football the last couple of years. Something I did want to mention. So there was 5 fumbles in that game, and Buffalo recovered all 5 of them. And that's the first time anybody's ever lost a game when they've recovered every single fumble, all 5. What do you have to say about that? I mean, just like fumbles tend to be a luck thing sometimes, just depends on the way the ball bounces. But people tend to say that the Chiefs get all the good luck and all the good calls, but I mean, you recover 5 fumbles in one game and you can't pull it out. Like, what do you have to say about that?
Right, the turnover deficit is so crucially important, obviously, in these games, and you'd expect it to be tight between these two teams that are very, very competitive and very well disciplined. But I mean, if the offense isn't clicking, the offense isn't clicking. It doesn't matter who ends up with the ball. Like, recovering 5 fumbles, and it's the Buffalo Bills offense, you'd expect 45 points. And so I just think that shows, I mean, maybe it's just time for a Brandon Aubrey trade to the Bills so that they're not leaving any empty drives. But until you have him, run the ball. Just find a way to get the first. You do not need to be a chunk play offense anymore. They're trying to run the spread and still the vertical at the same time. Like, it's just pick a lane and stick in it. That's really all I can say.
100%.
It doesn't seem like this team really has their identity right now, and I think a lot of that has to do with the vet presence that left last year. Steph Diggs, their safety room, really a lot of their talent on defense.
Right.
And, until you rebuild that culture, with some of this young talent you're bringing in your Keon Coleman's, you're just not going to be there. You do not have that identity and discipline where you are always going to show up in January.
Yeah. You bring up Keon Coleman, which reminds me. So Keon Coleman's obviously a rookie, as well as Xavier Worthy on the other side for Kansas City, and both of them last year's draft, they both needed receivers, and Kansas City called Buffalo and said, "Hey, I want to trade picks with you. I want to swap with you, and I want to draft Xavier Worthy." So they did. Buffalo agreed to it, and Xavier Worthy had 100 yards, and Keon Coleman had, I believe, 1 catch in the championship. And then you rewind 7 years ago, Kansas City called and said, "Hey, I want to trade up and draft Patrick Mahomes," even though Buffalo needed a quarterback. And they're like, "Okay, sure." They traded up, they got Patrick, and Buffalo ended up with Josh Allen. And, Buffalo fans are going to say, "Oh, well, it worked out because we got the second best quarterback in football." No, it didn't. It didn't work out.
You don't have a ring.
You don't have a ring. You don't have the future greatest player in the history of football on your team. So, yeah, he's fantastic. He's great. He's the second coming of Cam Newton. But he's not Patrick Mahomes. So
Cam Newton also doesn't have a ring.
That's right. But, I mean, the Chiefs I said it before, they're just playing chess. Everybody else is playing checkers. I mean, they're doing circles around Buffalo and on the field, off the field. Yeah, so just wanted to mention that to preface the front office of Kansas City just doing a number on Buffalo as well, because it's just such a one-sided rivalry at this point. It's not even competitive. Like, the game score might have been close, but it's Kansas City owns the AFC.
Absolutely. Pivoting to the NFC,
right?
And speaking of front offices, the Washington Commanders have the ability to be one of the best teams we've seen in the NFC in a long time, maybe a real juggernaut. And it starts with the quarterback, like you mentioned. The AFC has those 3 or 4 of the top 5 quarterbacks in the league.
Sure.
Jayden Daniels is now entering that conversation, and they have $1 billion in cap space and serviceable to great coaching staff. How far are they, from a real title shot? Because, I mean, you could argue they had one this year. They didn't play a perfect game. Philly just was the better team. But with some roster help, the same way Philly, like they didn't make incredible roster improvements on defense other than some of the young talent like Coop and Q, but bringing in the Zach Bonds and just having the right guy, the coordinator, Vic Fangio, made all the difference.
Yeah. I want to preface this by saying this loss is not on Jayden Daniels at all. He shouldn't get any blame.
Love you, Pookie.
Love you, Pookie. Jayden Daniels is going to be back next year and is going to make an MVP run for sure. You can book it right now. This front office, like you said, it does have the ability to make this Washington team very strong for a very long time. It's going to be very difficult for, unfortunately, your Cowboys and the New York Giants to be competitive unless they get the quarterback right, because like you said, they just have so much money and so much opportunity to build a team around Jayden. They could easily go get a T. Higgins or potentially a Tyreek Hill if he becomes available in Miami and just make that offense unstoppable. I mean, it already was legit this entire year, but like you add a bona fide X receiver alongside Terry McLaurin and it's wraps. So, halfway through the season, if you told me, they'd make the playoffs, they'd be a wild card team, I'd be like, okay, they're still probably a year or two away, similar to what CJ Stroud and the Texans were last year. But I mean, you make an NFC championship game your rookie year, you're pretty darn close. I mean, just a couple correct signings, a starter or two out of the draft, and I think this team's really going to be back in that NFC championship game next year at the bare minimum. I mentioned previously how some of the top contenders this year or even last year are starting to fall off a little bit. Washington's on the come up. Washington is going to be in that conversation in the Super Bowl or NFC Championship game probably within the next 2 or 3 years. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do this offseason. They definitely need to add a running back. A bona fide star back there, because Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler were serviceable for them this year, but behind a mediocre to below average offensive line for the most part, it's just not going to cut it. A couple more pieces on defense would be nice as well. They did make the acquisition of Marshawn Lattimore, which helped them out a lot this year, but they're still a young team. They still have some work to do to build around this guy, but yeah, it's going to be tough not to see Jayden Daniels, winning a ring within the next 5 years or so. I mean, you gotta imagine Kelsey or Andy Reid is gonna retire relatively soon, and it's gonna be anybody's league for the taking. And I'm putting my chips on Jayden Daniels.
And even then, you look at the last NFC Super Bowl title was the Rams just a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Since he's still in that, I mean, probably not roster-wise anymore, potentially losing T, still not having a deal done with Jamar. They might not be the team to beat Kansas City, but, the AFC being so competitive makes it to where Kansas City, if they take an off year, the NFC is in a prime position to take the title.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that is where, Washington could be the team to do it. You mentioned running backs. There's some great free agent running backs this year. We're seeing the top 3 rushers this year are on brand new teams. So you look at maybe a split backfield or, a solo guy, but Kareem Hunt's out there, Rico Dowdle's out there. But, Dallas is definitely going to sign Rico because we know what we're doing. There are candidates out there in addition to the plethora of rookies coming into the league this year in the backfield, and they could find an answer there for sure, and they could draft some young talent, and just with that much cap space, I mean, I don't think there's any limit to what they could do. So, yeah, I am a little scared of Washington moving forward, but I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do, and, maybe we do have this kind of juggernaut in the NFC that we've never had before, because last year it was the Niners, but the Niners played the Ravens in, week 15 and just got worked because they just didn't have Lamar.
Mm-hmm.
That was the key difference, and Jayden is the NFC's Lamar at this point, just the only dual threat, speedster, skinny, but he can sling the ball downfield quarterback in the NFC.
Yeah, we've talked before about how the AFC is the conference of the star quarterbacks, and the NFC is the conference of the loaded rosters, and having Jayden Daniels on his rookie deal, you have 4 years to put a Philly or Detroit level roster around him. And with the new ownership group they have in there, you got to imagine that, they're going to do so. You mentioned free agent running backs. Aaron Jones is going to be out there, Najee Harris, J.K. Dobbins, names like that. Guys I'd love to see in a Washington uniform, as well as maybe drafting a guy. And yeah, maybe another alignment or so for them as well would really, really increase their chances. But yeah, how do you feel about Philly and how dominant their performance was this past weekend? I mean, 55 points in a conference championship game, that's pretty unheard of.
Not to discredit Philly at all. Just a disclaimer, that Washington defense is bad, and they have been all year. And there's no getting around that just because they, did enough to beat the Lions, because the Lions still scored 30-some. Philly's very impressive. Their ground game is very impressive, as well as their defense. To hold that Washington offense down the way they did, very, very impressive outing. I'm not, worried for my Super Bowl pick, but I do think that Philly is the best team in football, roster-wise. Some very good coaching, and I think Jalen Hurts is up there in that conversation of, crunch time quarterbacks. He's one of the guys who can get it done, mostly just because of his legs. Like, having that ability to get that 8-yard rush for a first down on 3rd and long, that's so, so valuable. And not a lot of guys have that, especially in the NFC. Philly has talent at every position that you can imagine. The best O-line in football, one of the best receiving rooms in football, the best running back in football, a top 10 quarterback. And their defense has just been playing out of their minds this year. There's no reason why they shouldn't win the Super Bowl other than just Pat Mahomes and Andy Reid. It's just the Chiefs connection that I think is going to do it. And truthfully, Kellen Moore a little bit still. I'm cautious with that play calling, but it's becoming harder to doubt them for sure.
Yeah, when in doubt, just give Saquon Barkley the ball. This dude is maybe the most unstoppable running back we've seen in a long time.
5 or 6 rushing touchdowns in that game.
I believe it was 6. Actually, I think it was 7. If Saquon Barkley gets you right up to the goal line and you just push Jalen Hurts in, who's stopping that? I know the Chiefs gave Josh Allen the Bills fits with it this past week, but they didn't have to deal with Saquon Barkley touching the ball because the Bills forgot how to use their running back. So, did you have something to say? Sorry.
I just think you could argue that the key for Kansas City, and we'll talk more about the Super Bowl next week, of course, is just going to be holding Saquon to 125 yards. What more can you do? Their game plan is going to be to run the ball.
Yeah, 1,000%.
And if they fall behind, they have great receivers, and Jalen has a decent arm, but don't worry about A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith until you have to. That's right. Tomorrow's problem. Saquon is
right now. Yeah, 100%. It's going to be interesting to see when we talk more about it how the Chiefs' game plan is gonna line up, and if this Super Bowl looks more so like it did a couple years back. But it was a great win from Philly. It's unfortunate to see a blowout this late in the playoffs, but Philly was just a better team, like you said, so it was bound to happen.